I'm Glenn Berger, Chair of the Department of English, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the English Department's newest distinguished professor, Richard McCoy. The foundation of Rich McCoy's career was laid with his first book, Sir Philip Sidney, Rebellion in Arcadia, published by Rutgers University Press in 1979. This was a groundbreaking work on Sidney's romance in the interrelationship of literature and politics in the Elizabethan period, and a pioneering effort in the movement that would become known as New Historicism. His second and third books, The Rites of Knighthood, The Literature and Politics of Elizabethan Chivalry, published by University of California Press in 1989, and Alterations of State, Sacred Kingship in the English Reformation, published by Columbia University Press in 2002, further solidified Rich's status as a major cultural historian of the early modern period in England. These books continue to draw impressive connections between the realms of politics and literature. The first elucidating particularly the ways in which an Elizabethan ideology of chivalry shapes the works of such important Renaissance writers as Skelton, Shakespeare, Milton, and Marvell. The second, focusing on the ways in which a specifically religious ideology of political status, the sacralization of kingship, shaped the culture of England as it underwent pervasive religious reform and revolution. Over the past decade, Rich's attention has turned increasingly to Elizabethan drama, in particular the plays of Shakespeare. His most recent book, Faith in Shakespeare, published this year by Oxford University Press, which Stephen Greenblatt has called, quote, an eloquent brief for theatrical faith, end quote, bears witness to his central position in Shakespeare studies. At a time when there has been a strong critical turn to Shakespeare and religion, the book mounts a nuanced analysis of Shakespeare's interest in the problem of belief as aesthetic rather than religious. Professor McCoy has received a number of awards and honors during his career, notably an ACLS Fellowship in 1987, a Guggenheim in 1992, and NEH Fellowships in 1981 and 2006. But he's also a scholar to whom prestigious Shakespeare practitioners turn for his expertise, serving as chair of the Council of Scholars for New York City's award-winning Theater for a New Audience. He's also currently scholar advisor for a Shakespeare exhibition scheduled for the Folger Shakespeare Library and Newberry Library in 2016. What this list of distinguished professional accomplishments doesn't make clear, though, is the extent to which Rich is also a generous colleague, a caring and dedicated teacher, and, I guess for lack of a better term, just a good department citizen.
I'm so grateful to Queens College for this promotion and for providing me with the support for the research and publications that have made that promotion possible. I'm also very grateful to my colleagues and my students here at Queens for sustaining such a stimulating, diverse, and vibrant workplace. Classrooms where I can continue to teach and to learn. And I'm really happy to have so many of you here today to listen to me talk a bit about my work. My subject, as Glenn said, is poetic faith in Shakespeare, and I have to confess it took me a long time to get started on Shakespeare. I stayed away from him for a long time because A, I felt I was not worthy, B, what could I possibly say about Shakespeare that was new, and C, Bill Graham and Margaret Renauld had it pretty much covered here at Queens. I spoke at Bill Green's memorial service last week and recalled my first meeting with him when our chair, the late Lois Hewson, introduced us and assured him, don't worry, Bill, he doesn't do Shakespeare. That was the case by my choice for the first half of my career. I loved the work of Sir Philip Sidney, of Edmund Spenser, and various other wonderful poets of that period, and I wrote my first two books about those guys. But about 20 years ago, I got a research fellowship at the Folger Shakespeare Library, shown here in Washington, D.C. And Shakespeare is sort of in the water there, and inescapable. I was at the Folger. I think the Folger was established in the 1930s by Henry Clay Folger, a Standard Oil executive, who bought up everything Shakespearean he could lay hands on after hearing Ralph Waldo Emerson praise Shakespeare at Amherst College, where he was a student. It's owned by Amherst. He set it up on Capitol Hill, kitty corner to the Supreme Court, and he stuffed it with every first folio he could lay hands on. It's got more first folios than any collection in the world, including the UK, plus a huge amount of other contemporary material from the period. It's a great research site. I was there for a fairly extended stay, and I ran an NEH Summer Institute on redefining the sacred in the English Reformation 1 year. And I spent another fellowship year researching a book on sacred kingship in the Reformation. That book, which Ben referred to, Alterations of State, was about changing ideas of the sacred during the Reformation. In traditional Catholicism, the Mass and the Eucharist are the holiest of holies. Christ's real presence is depicted here. I'm going to try this that's all. Shown on the altar. And behind, backing up that is Christ in his real presence up on a cloud with all the saints. And this is Raphael's splendid depiction of the doctrine of the real presence. During the Reformation in England and elsewhere, the Mass was eliminated and the real presence debunked. In this tract from King Edward VI's reign, the Corpus Christi procession is mocked, and the host is disparaged. This is a Corpus Christi procession. As Amy Duffy has suggested, this is probably just a woodcut from the earlier late medieval woodcut, but it's used to be abused in this tract called John Bonne and Mass Person, where alas, poor fools carrying this host in their Corpus Christi procession are mocked, and the host disparaged as no more than a wafer cake. You bear on your shoulders a great God which you yourselves made. And that's the kind of iconoclasm that the English Reformation went in for. That all starts, of course, with Henry VIII, who fails to obtain a divorce, breaks with Rome and the papacy, and asserts royal supremacy over the church. He's shown here in Fox's Book of Martyrs, using the Pope as a footstool. On the title page of the Great Bible, Henry sits enthroned, distributing the word of God to his people, but just above him there is Jesus in the heavens, looking down upon him as his deputy on earth. The exaltation of the king up to the heavens continues up through the 17th century in England. This is a painting by Peter Paul Rubens in Whitehall Banquet House, showing the apotheosis and entry into heaven of King James after his death. His son Charles commissioned it. And in the masks, the court masks of the period, you get a similar kind of apotheosis of the monarchy. And what strikes me about this mask scene, which is by Inigo Jones, in one of the last masks written before King Charles, just before Civil War breaks out in 1640, is its resemblance to Raphael's Vespucci. We see the gods gathered above on a heavenly cloud, and in the performance of this play, the king would have been enthroned at the center of the viewing space, and he becomes a kind of healing presence as the chorus fills the whole scene with apparitions and harmonies. In this depiction. It's not the host that's the center of attention, but the king who has the sacramental power. This replacement of the real presence with the royal presence fascinated me, and I wanted to explore its ramifications in early modern literature. I also, when I was writing that book on sacred kingship, wanted to include a chapter on Shakespeare, and I jumped in where angels fear to tread, deciding that of all the plays that deal with sacred kingship, the one I just had to write about was Hamlet. It's a famous editor of the very own Shakespeare and Harvard, who gave a commencement address to 5 captain and said, "Gentlemen, I implore you, I appeal to you, I plead with you, not another word on Hamlet." This was in 1904. Anyway, I've added my share to that. I was fascinated in this connection by a work that could claim that such divinity doth hedge a king that treason can but peep to what it would, while placing that affirmation of divine kingship in the mouth of a regicide, Claudius. I was especially intrigued by the ambiguities of this scene, the so-called closet scene, and the ghost's reappearance midway through the play. The ghost of Hamlet's father comes once more to whet Hamlet's almost blunted purpose. Almost blunted purpose. Hamlet's astonished that his mother can't see it and exclaims, in the lines I put up here, "His form and cause conjoined, preaching stones would make him capable." A conjunction in the play where so much is out of joint seemed like a good thing to me, even perhaps a consummation devoutly to be wished. The scriptural allusions are very evocative. The line could refer to the Hebrew Bible and Habakkuk's assurance that wicked tyrants will be punished without need for human intervention, because the stone shall cry out of the wall and the beam of the timber shall answer it. It could also refer to Palm Sunday in the Christian Gospel of Luke, when Christ is greeted by his disciples, shouting, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord," told by the Pharisees to shut them up. Christ says, "I tell you, if these should hold their peace, the stones would cry out." While researching Reformation theologians, I also discovered that conjunction was the term used by John Calvin, Thomas Cranmer, Richard Hooker, and other Protestant authorities to refer to the union of Christ's body and blood with the bread and wine in the Eucharist. Moreover, Edmund Plowden, a lawyer and political writer, used it to describe the mystical union of the king's two bodies. What Hamlet seems to be yearning for here is a kind of Eucharistic miracle in which the king's otherwise invisible, ghostly body becomes both a regal and messianic real presence. By making even stones cry out, such conjunction might get Hamlet off the hook and relieve him of the need to act. But of course, that doesn't happen. Gertrude sees nothing but vacancy and incorporeal error, and we're left in a state as out of joint as ever. For me, 20 years ago, Shakespeare, Hamlet, all this material proved irresistible. And once I got started, no turning back. I wrote articles on Henry IV and V, King Lear, Macbeth. I proposed writing a book on Shakespeare and Reformation theology. By that point, the so-called turn to religion was surging in English studies, and I got an NEH fellowship and a Scholars Incentive Award from Queens to get started. But as I got going, I noticed that Shakespeare and the religion bandwagon was getting pretty crowded and pushing some fairly dubious claims, especially speculation about Shakespeare's own religious belief, which is run rampant, with many contending he was a secret Catholic. Even Steve Greenblatt joins that speculation. Arguments like these gave me doubts about the play's religious preoccupations, and I didn't particularly want to return to the faith of my fathers. Obviously, there are theological, sacramental, and scriptural allusions throughout his plays, but when I returned to Hamlet, I realized that his religious signals are not just mixed, but really deflationary. The play has a ghost come from a Catholic purgatory where sins are burnt and purged away. It confronts a prince educated in Luther's Wittenberg. It has maimed rites that vacillate between the Catholic requiem, on 2 instances where that word is used, and Protestant commemoration. Still, in returning to Hamlet, I started to see the play's religious allusions as primarily a theatrical strategy. Shakespeare uses religious terminology to give his scenes a powerful jolt, imparting a supernatural aura to his ghosts and spirits and even gods, while arousing hopes for aid from a higher power. Those hopes are usually disappointed, but their frustration paradoxically increases their dramatic intensity. Hamlet's use of another theologically loaded phrase is a case in point. After he first encounters the ghost, he refers to its movements, hic et ubique, or here and everywhere. At first, I saw this as a possible reference to Martin Luther's doctrine of ubiquity. In his confession concerning Christ's supper, Luther argues that Christ could be in heaven and his body in the supper because Christ's body is everywhere. Here and everywhere. For a time, I read this as another indication of Hamlet's yearning for a Eucharistic miracle. Yet, once the actor playing the ghost has descended through his trap door, Hamlet starts calling him the fellow in the cellarage and old mole in a somewhat derisory way. It's a meta-theatrical moment calling attention to the Elizabethan stage's limited special effects. The actor playing Hamlet makes the actor playing the ghost into a kind of joke, mocking its movements, hic et ubique. Jokes like that make it hard to believe, to know what to believe about the ghost come from the grave, and the impact is somewhat unsettling. Tony Kushner does something comparable, I think, at the end of part 1 of Angels in America, Millennium Approaches. That play concludes with an apocalyptic climax that is both stunning and self-consciously over the top. This is from the revival Signature Theater 2 years ago. When the ceiling starts to collapse over the feverish, AIDS-stricken protagonist, Friar Lewis, he's no less terrified than Hamlet at the arrival of the ghost. Then an angel crashes through the ceiling in a great blaze of triumphal music to greet him as a prophet and declare the great work begins. The stunned protagonist's response is just as archly ambivalent as Hamlet's. He says, "God Almighty, very Steven Spielberg." This wry blend of frightened awe and defensive mockery lets us see this stunning climax as the stage trick that it is. Yet the joke does not diminish the scene's dramatic intensity any more than Hamlet's jibes about the fellow in the cellarage. On the contrary, it amps up the excitement. In his preface to this play, Kushner explains that the play's moments of magic are to be fully realized as wonderful bits of theatrical illusion, which means it's okay if the wires show, and maybe it's good that they do, but the magic should at the same time be thoroughly amazing. Here and elsewhere, Kushner is fascinating. Let's read your collection of things included on this point, and you've written about it as well. He's fascinated with Bertolt Brecht's alienation effect, but for him and for Shakespeare, this reminder of theatrical artifice is paradoxically more engaging than alienating, enhancing rather than diminishing the scene's power. Kushner's take on his own play allows for a fresh perspective on theater that is actually quite old-fashioned. This paradox is a variation, I think, on the willing suspension of disbelief for the moment, which constitutes poetic faith, quoting, of course, Samuel Taylor Coleridge here. And in my recent book, Faith in Shakespeare, I go back to Coleridge and other great Romantic poets and critics, because their approach to Shakespeare affirms poetic over religious faith. Coleridge embraces theatrical illusion while distinguishing it from delusion. He allows the stage presentations produce a sort of temporary half-faith which the spectator encourages in himself and supports by a voluntary contribution on his own part, because he knows that it is at all times in his power to see the thing as it really is. In watching a stage play, we can simultaneously see through its performance and remain intensely absorbed. To illustrate this process, he cites the chorus in Henry V, who admits that the theater's narrow cockpit cannot hold the vasty fields of France, so we, in the audience, must piece out the actors' imperfections with your thoughts. In Faith in Shakespeare, I take Coleridge's conception of the willing suspension of disbelief as my critical credo, arguing that the play demands poetic rather than religious faith. When Paulinus says, it is required you do awake your faith in the Winter's Tale, and this is the scene that's on the cover of my book, that's what she wants. When Rosalind says, in As You Like It, believe then, if you please, that I can do strange things, that's what she wants too, from her lover and from us. Faith in Shakespeare is not faith in the supernatural or sacramental, but in purely human artifice, poetic eloquence, and dramatic performance. At the same time, the plays and their performers also ask us for an emotional commitment that entails good faith and goodwill and something like love. Sonnet 23 makes that parallel between the actor and his audience, and the lover and beloved, explicit. There's an unperfect actor on the stage who, with too much fear, is put beside his part. So I, for fear of trust, forget to say the perfect ceremony of love's rite. The sonnet speaker, like the chorus in Henry V, asks us to piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Self-deprecation and appeals for our help are in fact the standard technique used by many of Shakespeare's spokesmen, most frequently in his prologues and epilogues. The epilogue to Henry IV, Part 2, begs our pardon for a displeasing play, prays for our patience, and promises a better sequel. The actor playing Rosalind appears at the end of As You Like It, and of course the boy actor, and he puts both the play and himself down, saying, he is neither a good epilogue, nor can I insinuate with you on behalf of a good play. In the Tempest epilogue, the previously omnipotent magician Prospero prays for our pardon and renounces his magic powers. That's certainly the pattern for most of the plays I consider in Faith in Shakespeare. But my current work, which is on Shakespeare's clowns, focuses on a character whose approach to acting in theater is quite different. What does Shakespeare do with an actor who assumes his own perfection rather than apologizing for imperfections? What do we make of a character who assumes his performance is so good that he has to assure the audience it's not real? In other words, what do we make of Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream? Bottom is so sure of his own skill that he wants to play every part. After he's given the role of Pyramus, he says, "Thou will ask some tears in the true performing of it. If I do, let the audience look to their eyes. I will move storms." He also wants to play Thisbe and the Lion, but Queen's finally persuades him that he's perfect for Pyramus. And Bottom concludes this scene with an admonition to his fellow actors to live up to his own exalted standards. Take pains, be perfect. Bottom's conceit highlights Shakespeare's reversal of his usual modesty. In Bottom, he counters disarming self-deprecation with obtuse megalomania. I have two questions about this character and the rude mechanicals in their performance. The first is about its impact on our willing suspension of disbelief and of our enjoyment of the play. I don't think anyone finds Pyramus and Thisbe especially credible or moving, but it remains for many the best part of Midsummer Night's Dream. The second question is, how does it work, and why? Why is the repeated, completely unnecessary reminder that the performance is not real so funny? Probably the most successful comic routine in all of Shakespeare, Pyramus and Thisbe is a weirdly foolproof performance by manifest fools, a parody of a parody, a mockery that invites mock. Even though they leave the killing out, it still kills in the parlance of stand-up comedy. It might help to compare it with a similarly goofy and killing performance by Ian McKellen in the Ricky Gervais TV show Extras.
Tilly, I thought she was interesting.
Ricky Gervais.
That's better. That one.
Hello, Andy Millman. Andy, do sit down.
It's a pleasure to meet you three.
But please, no titles in the workplace. Oh. Thank you. Andy Millman. Good. Not much theatre work of late.
No.
Oh, that's right. You're in good hands here. How do I act so well? What I do is I pretend to be the person I'm portraying in the film or play.
Yeah.
You're confused.
No.
It's perfectly simple. Case in point, Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson comes from New Zealand, says to me, Sir Ian, I want you to be Gandalf the wizard. And I say to him, you are aware that I am not really a wizard. And he said, yes, I am aware of that. What I want you to do is to use your acting skills to portray the wizard for the duration of the film. So I said, okay. And then I said to myself, how would I do that? And this is what I did. I imagined what it would be like to be a wizard, and then I pretended and acted in that way on the day.
Yeah.
And how did I know what to say? The words were written down for me in a script. How did I know where to stand? People told me. If we were to draw a graph of my process, of my method, something like this: Sir Ian, Sir Ian, Sir Ian, action. Wizard, you shall not pass! Cut! Sir Ian, Sir Ian, Sir Ian.
Okay.
You see?
Yeah.
So now you would be pretending to be John in this play. And how would you know what to say? Well, the words would be in the script.
Yeah.
And you would learn the words. You would not have the script on the night. And that goes for everybody. There will be no scripts on the night. You would learn the words.
Yeah. No,
You
I
would speak them as if you were saying them for the first time.
I didn't think we would have the script.
No, but you won't.
No.
Because if you did have the script, it would break the illusion, and the whole thing is illusioned. You see, you are not really John.
No, I know.
You are pretending, and that is acting.
That is acting. I love this because, of course, I recognize the kindred spirit to Bottom in this play. Both Bottom and Sir Ian share an invincible confidence in their own acting abilities. They also take their roles literally. The hero's tragic demise in Pyramus and Thisbe and the wizardry of the Lord of the Rings. Moreover, their literal-mindedness makes both feel the need to reassure those watching the show that their performance isn't real. Sir Ian's megalomania may baffle Ricky Gervais, but the rest of the troupe, as you may have noticed, hangs on his every word. Bottom's grandiosity and literalism are no less infectious. When he warns that his death might distress the ladies, the other players are frightened, and Starveling proposes that they must leave the killing out. Bottom can't bear to have his big scene omitted, so he demands a prologue that we will do no harm with our swords, and that Pyramus is not killed indeed. And the more better assurance, I will tell them that I, Pyramus, am not Pyramus, but Bottom the Weaver, and that will put them out of fear. Puck rewards this stupidity by planting an ass's head, shown here in this wonderful illustration by Henry Fuseli. An ass's head on Bottom, and making him the butt of a joke implied by his name. But this nightmare becomes a dream come true when the fairy queen Titania wakes up and falls instantly in love with him. Puck's love potion has distorted her perception, and she finds my eye enthralled to thy shape. The fairies mess with almost everyone, but Bottom is the only character who actually sees and interacts with them. His entry into their domain holds out the prospect of a more profound, even spiritual transformation. Titania is determined, as she says in this passage I quoted, to purge thy mortal grossness so that thou shalt like an airy spirit go. Well, that doesn't work out so well. Bottom still is very much attached to his donkey father. But he leads her and awakens with a dream vision past the wit of man to say what dream it was. He even makes a garbled reference to the first epistle to the Corinthians, saying, the eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, which of course echoes St. Paul's description of the treasures that await the true Christian in the kingdom of heaven. Many distinguished critics read that passage as a kind of religious epiphany. Frank Kermode, I suppose I should say Sir Frank Kermode, after Sir Ian Frank Kermode finds here a genuine transformation and an experience of divine love. I don't see it that way. There's no real follow-through. The promised ballad of this dream never materializes. In fact, this first recollection is not one of spiritual exaltation, but of a missed cue. When he wakes up, he says, when my cue comes, call me and I'll answer. His thoughts drift back to the vague memories of fairy delights, but they quickly return to his impending performance. It's a show that has to go on, not the religious rapture. He's going to be the star. After he reunites with his fellow players, his promise to discourse wonders is soon forgotten, and everyone's attention shifts to the news, his news, that our play is preferred. Once again, theater trumps and absorbs religion. The gentles are relentless in their mockery of Pyramus and Thisbe, but Bottom is undaunted. His death throes are absurdly melodramatic, but he springs back to life and offers an epilogue. Theseus says, no epilogue, I pray you. But Theseus doesn't get the last word. Puck, the mischievous fairy, does deliver an epilogue, this epilogue. At first, his address to the audience sounds not only like Shakespeare's standard self-deprecation, but also a complete capitulation to Theseus, who regards actors as insubstantial lightweights. The best in this kind are but shadows. The actor playing Puck describes himself and his company accordingly and apologizes for their inconsequence. If we shadows have offended, he tells us, just think of the play and its players as a dream, applaud, and forget about everything you just saw and experienced. That's what the gentle lovers say. But here and elsewhere, self-deprecation is the flip side of self-assertion, and sprezzatura goes with chutzpah. Much as Puck is in many ways an inversion of Bottom. Puck is called a lob of spirits and addressed as Robin Goodfellow. Lob means a country bumpkin, and it's rooted, as I learned from the OED, in Old English and Germanic words for a lump of flesh. Neither he nor Bottom can ever be purged of their mortal grossness. This is a joke book from 1629 called Robin Goodfellow, his pranks and merry jests. And it shows him on the title page as a faun, fusing a goat's limbs with a man's torso, along with some rather impressively oversized genitals. In this incarnation, Robin is the flip image of Bottom, with his ass's head and human body, but both of them are a combination of physical and spiritual bottom and top. In the epilogue, Puck is on his best behavior, asking for our pardon, and promising to mend, but he's still in character, and he is still pucking with us. In its second half, his speech acquires a sharper edge when he describes himself as an honest Puck and dares us to say otherwise. I've underlined honest up there. Else the Puck a liar call. If not quite a fighting word, honest is a term that should put us on guard, especially in Shakespeare's plays. Honest Iago is probably the worst case. But Shylock's servant, the merchant of Venice, is no less treacherous when he refers to himself repeatedly as honest Lancelot and honest Gobbo on the point of betraying his master. The most relevant of these epithets involves Touchstone's identification with the most capricious, honest Ovid stuck among the gods. Touchstone then tells Audrey, this isn't as you like it, that he wishes the gods had made thee poetical, so they could put aside any pretense of virtue and hop into the sack. Audrey does not know what poetical is. Is it honest in deed and word? Is it a true thing? And he responds, no, truly, for the truest poetry is the most feigning. For me, that is one of the greatest statements of the paradoxical premises of faith in Shakespeare. Touchstone freely admits the falsehood of his poetic claims, but charms us into accepting them anyway, even while urging us to see through them. Bottom's declaration that I, Pyramus, am not Pyramus, but Bottom the weaver, and Puck's insistence on his own honesty are comparably mind-boggling paradoxes. William Hazlitt memorably described actors as the only honest hypocrites, hypocrites being a Greek word for acting, because they never really pretend to be the person they play, and they don't ask us to believe their stories. We only have to suspend our disbelief and mind true things by what their mockeries be. Faith in Shakespeare allows these players to work magic for us, even if they're not really wizards or fairies. Thanks.